Is Terry Morris coming in? Awesome. One more. Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming in after your day, decompressing with us. Welcome to Court 101. I'm going to go around. I'm Gloria Switzer. I am the program associate at CASA. I'm going to ask our staff here on the session to introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about their position at CASA. So I was hoping Lynn would get started. Oh, let me unmute you.
Sorry, barking dog. Hi everyone, I'm Lynn Barrio. I am the assistant director, and nice to see you all.
Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Steele. I'm a advocate supervisor, and I just appreciate all of you taking your time to spend a little bit of time with us today.
Thank you. And Chrissy Shaw, new.
Hi, I'm Chrissy Shaw. Been in CASA for about 2 months now, program associate. So I do supervise advocates and a little bit of other fun stuff like fundraising and event planning with Glow and a lot of the other CASA team.
Thanks, Chrissy. We're glad to have you. So the goal and objective of this court training is to provide and achieve a structured process that is efficient and effective for our advocates who attend court, and at the same time representing our organization as a whole in the court process. So tonight we're going to talk about kind of beginning to end, explain, start with current court procedures. We'll talk about court etiquette and our role in the courtroom, and then at the end allow some time for some question and answers. So the current court procedures, the courts that we work out of in Worcester County, obviously Worcester Juvenile Court, Fitchburg Juvenile Court, Milford, and Dudley Juvenile Courts. And maybe we could just take a minute. I'll have some staff talk about those courthouses and explain the process, what a day in court looks like. So you'll hear some phrases and vocabulary that will become familiar to you that are used in the court setting. Talking about hearings, checking in with attorneys, etc. So I was hoping, Jim, you'd be willing to share your expertise. Jim is an expert. He can juggle courtrooms and hearings. And when we were on Zoom, he'd have 2 courtrooms open at the same time, which none of us could figure out how to do. So he is going to get that going for us. Thank you, Jim.
Yes. So I think that the first thing that those of you that I can see that haven't been to court, because a couple of you that I see have been to court before, is you just need to know it's not like TV. It's not neat, tidy, and there's not always a result or a new result or a change of circumstances at every hearing. So, but generally in Worcester, the call the list by Judge Murata is at 9 o'clock. And his call the list goes from anywhere from 15 minutes to a half hour. And in that time, pretty much every attorney that's on the floor or in there for a hearing that day is in that room. So because of that, the other judges, Judge Lowry, Judge Keating, and Judge Bolivar, don't generally open their courtrooms to 9:30, and then they do their own call the list. So what's the call the list? The call the list is the docket for that day. It's alphabetical, and they go through every single case. They see if they have a gathering of attorneys, and if they are, then they set a time for that hearing in that courtroom for that hearing to be heard. If all the attorneys are not there, then they put it for a second call, and they go through the whole list, and then they go through it again. Generally, even though CASA is allowed into these call the list particularly judge marauders. I myself don't go in, I wait outside, and I know that if I have one or two hearings with what in whatever courtroom with whatever attorneys, when they come out of the call of the list, I will ask them what do they expect to have happen on that day. So assuming we go in on a hearing at a specific time, the judge will ask DCF to give an update as to what's going on with the case. And then she or he would generally call on the child's attorney and then the parents' attorneys. And at times they will ask CASA what we think. I would say that particularly with this new regime that our reports are read. Sometimes in the comments made by anybody in the room, including the judge, they may refer to something in our reports. And if we are asked to speak, and if one of you were with me, I would ask you to gather your thoughts and ask you to tell the court in 2 or 3 sentences whatever you think is the most important thing that the court should know. Something that I say this time that I didn't say earlier today was ironically after a conversation with advocate today, is that if somebody says something that we were going to say, then there's no point in piling on. So if I wanted to say the child needs to be in therapy or a therapeutic mentor or needs to get a medical appointment that's been missed and we need the department to follow up on getting that appointment made. If somebody, the child's attorney or somebody else makes that same point and I don't have anything else to add and that point has been made and noted by the court, I might just say that don't have anything to add, Your Honor, our report speaks for itself. You go to court, you need to have a badge. You need to have, your attire needs to be what I would call professional. Old days, we'd call it Sunday best. You need to look nice. The judge has said that your appearance impacts your credibility. So I think that it's very important that you are cognizant of that when you go to court and you dress up, basically, to go to court. And there's not too many times in this day and age where you do dress up. People used to dress up to go out to dinner, and I don't think that happens anymore as much as it used to either. So that's pretty much what happens in Worcester. And really, I would say that over half the time, nothing will change. That there might be some words spoken, but you go from one hearing and that hearing will just get another date. But fundamentally, the case remains the same. The case remains open. The children are where they are. And some of the problems might still exist going into the next hearing. So there's not a seismic change when you go to court. There are occasions when there are hearings that there will have a change, but generally speaking, a regular hearing, you will not have too much happen.
Thank you. Chrissy, do you want to speak about any of the other courthouses that we've been to? And I can chime in too. So that leaves Fitchburg, Milford, and Dudley, and things are done differently, just, mostly because of the space they have. So obviously Worcester has the most courtrooms and it's a busy place. But if you want to talk about that, the other locations we go to.
Yeah, Fitchburg is a little bit different just because there is only one courtroom for the juvenile court. It's up on the 2nd floor, and usually the call of the list will still happen, but it's all in one courtroom. I myself go into the call of the list just because sometimes the times can be different, and we don't have the court officer there is very nice. He knows CASA. Judge McNulty knows CASA very well too. So it's the same thing. You go in, it's either given a date if not all the attorneys are present, or they ask for a new date, or they give a time of hearing. If you don't go in for the call of the list, it's okay there too, because they have a sheet that they usually fill out the times with the case and the time that they're giving it. And just because it gives us a time doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be at that exact time, considering sometimes it's earlier. Glow had that situation happen to her. Sometimes it's much later, and that's happened many times to me. So it's quieter. It's not as busy as Worcester. Jim is the Worcester court person. He knows everyone, and I feel like I'm becoming the Fitchburg person where everyone recognizes me.
Yeah,
So.
and you've been to Milford. I haven't been to Milford yet, which just reopened, and of course everything is adjusted differently. I mean, yes, it's back in person, but things are still different post-COVID. So you went to Milford, and
Yeah, Milford and Dudley are very similar, I think. If that's right, because you go downstairs, you check in, and Milford, we were given a number. It didn't mean anything. They never called the number, unfortunately, but that was also the first week we were back in person. So I think everyone was still getting like used to all the, getting back to in person and stuff. So, but Milford is the same. It's one courtroom on the second floor. Again, you'll be meeting the supervisor. Hopefully you'll be meeting your supervisor there when you go to court, so they can direct you and show you around. You go check in on the bottom floor, like in Milford, and they give you a number, and then you go upstairs where the courtroom is, and you wait for the number to be called. It's not necessarily an order of numbers either, and that's pretty similar to Dudley too, right, Glorianne?
Dudley, yep, Dudley, you go downstairs, you can check in. Some advocates may not do that, which is okay. They'll assign a number to the case, and they're not in order. It's not numerical order. It's just whatever. But I've been there, and they don't even call the number. They call the name, the last name on the case, Sullivan case. That's pretty crowded area because they have two courtrooms, and everybody's in the same waiting area. So juvenile courtroom 2, and the 1 is all adult cases being heard. So I think everyone would agree with me. It's a circus there sometimes in Dudley. It's pretty crowded. And Judge McNulty serves there and in Fitchburg. She spends her time between the two and when they're open. And it's a crowded area. You wouldn't go in on the call the list in Dudley because there's not enough room in the courtroom. But they are good at calling out the cases, and because of the tight quarters, you'll get to know the attorneys and can ask them when the case is going to be heard, because they're working that through as they go in and out of the courtroom themselves. So that's Dudley.
That's the same in, I'm sorry to interrupt, Fitchburg
That's
too.
good.
They will call out the court officer will call out the cases. So if perhaps we don't make the call or we miss it for some reason, the court officer will come out and call the name for the next case that's being heard, and that's when we'll be able to go in.
Yeah, and so we're only allowed to be in the court during their specific case, right? Sometimes supervisors might be in there because they're juggling. They're going to hear a case, and then someone's stuck in another courtroom, so they'll move us up or something. If we're in there and the case is going to be heard, we'll come and get you. But it's important for us to get in and out, so we're not sitting in other cases that we're not involved in. And then the other thing is that, and I think Jim touched on this, is that there's an understanding that cases may be continued. We'll go in there hoping there's a significant shift due to some things that have occurred on the case or with the children, and there's different reasons. A lot of reasons are not all the attorneys are there, or they need a new attorney to represent the parents or someone involved, and they can't hear it unless everyone's represented. So we try to be real careful about knowing ahead of time so that we're not wasting your time to come in. We appreciate people's busy schedules and coming to court, and we want to respect that. Sometimes we get in there and things beyond our control, and it's moved to another day, and that's how some of those things go. The other part of the process that we're going to touch on next is the legal process of cases, dealing with outcomes of cases, the different outcomes that you might hear or become familiar with. And I was hoping Lynn would touch on that for us.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I think at any given hearing, right, most of what we attend as CASA supervisors or CASA advocates are pretrial conferences, which is essentially a status update for the judge. so that the attorneys can give a progress report on what's happening, in what direction is it moving, or is the goal going to remain reunification? Is the goal going to change to adoption? And more often than not, as Jim said earlier, what you come out with is a new date. There was a time in years past where cases were only heard once or twice a year. But probably in the last 8 years or so, they're now heard every couple of months. In some cases, it seems like they're in every month for one reason or the other. And if you also recall from your training, we talk about the fact that judges have a lot of discretion or power at the beginning of a case and at the end of a case, but in the middle, it is mostly DCF deciding what's happening on the case or steering it in whatever direction it's going, unless another attorney, child's attorney or mother or father's attorney, files a motion because they're in disagreement with something that DCF is doing. And in those cases, they're requesting a judge's intervention. So the outcome of a motion hearing, maybe a mother's attorney is requesting increased visitation, and so a judge would rule on something like that. Or maybe there's a complaint because DCF has missed, 3 visits in a row, and, mother or father's attorney wants those visits made up. But, unless you're getting to a trial stage, it is typically the outcome is, whatever a judge has ordered, but more likely than not, it is a new date for another pretrial conference in the next couple months, continuing on the path that it's on. We file our reports a couple days in advance to both the attorneys and to the judge, which is something that we really only started doing during the pandemic. We previously used to file our reports on the day of the hearing, mostly because no matter when we sent them to attorneys, they never seemed to have them with them at the hearing. But I think it's actually benefited us in the long run. The judges have more time to take a look at them. And so oftentimes when they get on the bench, they've already read the CASA report. I think all of us as supervisors have been in court at one time or another when, as Jim said, the judge will go down the list of attorneys, and ask them, what's new, what's the status, whatnot. And I've certainly been present when an attorney for mom or dad has said, "Oh, Your Honor, mom's making great progress," right? And the judge will say, "Well, that's kind of interesting, attorney so-and-so, because that's not what it says in the CASA report," right? So they do take a look at our reports. They do read them. They do get filed. They do get entered into evidence if there's a termination of parental rights trial. But again, typically the outcome, unless it's a trial or a motion, is a continuation until the next court date. Jim, I don't know if you have anything I might have missed or you want to add to that.
No, the only other thing is a permanency hearing where they object about a goal change. Goal goes from being reunification, parents don't follow their action plan or just don't gain any traction. And the goal gets changed to adoption.
Mm-hmm.
So at a permanency hearing, if there's an objection, sometimes they just object, the attorneys will just object on the record, but other times they want a full-blown hearing. And those can be very interesting because they are, in fact, a small trial. Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing, that besides a regular motion, which could be for more visits or I'm not sure what other motions I've heard more than visitation orientated visits. Motions. So, but that's the other hearing that might be very interesting.
Yeah. And then sometimes you hear that, I think you hear good things that happen just from our involvement. I'm going to put her on the spot. I don't know if she's willing to talk about her first day in court. Emily, you did great. Do you want to share about it? You did great. It was a busy hearing. There was a lot going on, and it was a long wait, long sitting, but I was glad that you were able to feel like you helped. I think you did. Is that correct? Yeah.
I think you helped me feel like my report is, that what our work is the report, and we're just representing the report in the courtroom, because all the prep that I had for, sitting in the court went right out my head when the judge said, CASA, what are your observations and recommendations? And
I just said,
Gloria Ann was like, stand up, stand
yeah,
up.
you can stand. I said, you can stand. Because it can be, once you get over that, but to be called on, it's on the spot for all intents
Right.
and
And
purposes,
it
right?
didn't seem like she went through the other folks. She went right to CASA first.
She did.
Like she
That
was done. Yeah. And, but it's definitely panning out very similar to how I'm hearing the descriptions here.
She was pretty angry at the attorneys, and this is, why aren't they doing, talking about the action plan and why the parents now want this, that, and didn't want they didn't want the, guardianship, or were they going to adoptive? I can't remember. They were against what was ever happening, right? So, and they had been dragging their feet, and she was not happy. She's like, they should have been doing what they're doing, and you're saying they're making progress, but you have nothing to show. There's nothing in the court report. I don't even have a court report. She was pretty mad about that. But she had a CASA report.
Yeah, and I did like the advice to say, take a moment, compose yourself, then speak. That you said, I was like, that's what I need to do. Okay, that's all I got to say.
They are very forgiving.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. They are very forgiving to our advocates, because sometimes, often, they understand that it's stressful and it can be uncomfortable. But you reminded me, Gloria, of judges have moods just like anybody else, and there are days when, for a long time when I was a supervisor, I sat in Fitchburg Court, and so, and I only worked with one judge in that time frame.
Judge Capiato.
And
yeah,
there were some days when I had 3 or 4, maybe even 5 cases in front of him, and certain things that I wanted to bring up. And some days I would be sitting in his court when I'm thinking, today is not that day, right? Sometimes your supervisors over time you become attuned to judges' moods, and what's a good thing to bring up on a given day and what's not. And sometimes they're very strict about adhering to the rules, and other days, you can just tell that their demeanor is a little bit different. So, you'll get your cues from your supervisor as to, if that's, I'm not saying that's an issue all the time. It's not, but some days it's like, whoa, I don't even want to go in there today, right? Like some case sets them off in the morning and stays with them for the rest of the day. And I don't think I've ever had it directed at me. I could say that with 100% certainty, but sometimes they are unkind to the attorneys that are in front of them.
Oh, there was a lot going on that day. Yep. So we were grateful that Emily was there to jump in at first. So
and don't take things personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this a little bit earlier this afternoon, that sometimes, an attorney will stand up there and say, the CASA report's full of lies, or there's, untruths in here, or, my client did this, or my client did that, and you just really have to stand your ground with what you know. If you've written a factual report and you verified the information that's in there, it's easy to just respond, when the judge turns to you and say, I called the therapist and the therapist said, she hasn't been here for the last 5 weeks. That attorney could have been provided different information from his client.
Mm-hmm.
So, once again, we're reporting things that people have told to us. So there could, in fact, be things in our report that are not true. But we didn't make them up, right? That's what was told to us. If we need to go back, there have been a few times over the course of my 22 years where we have filed an addendum to a report because something that we put into the report was in fact not true. We it was true at the time we put it in the report, but sometimes there's a lag time, right, between when we're putting it in a report and something else has happened in the interim right before court. One of the things you'll find is that there's generally a lot of activity on the parents' part right before a court hearing. So sometimes certain things don't make it into our report, or maybe something was true on Monday and isn't true on Friday. But those are changes that we can easily make if need be. And every now and then we get something wrong and we say, you know, sorry, and we fix it. So it's not
Thank you.
personal. The attorneys aren't going to hold it against you, even though it seems like they're really angry in the moment. But, you know, attorneys are adversarial by nature and they like to argue.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about court etiquette. We kind of touched on it already. Always check with your supervisor before going into court. We're not going to assume that, don't assume that you need to show up, because some of the motions could be something that, you know, medication change or something that just really taking your time to go in would be not the best use of your time. And if anything's changed, we'll know about it. Again, the always have your badge. Your badge is what gets you in, and having that on kind of identifies us in the courtroom too, because they do say who's in the courtroom, and if we have that badge, we can be visible and accounted for. And then, of course, your appearance is going to affect your credibility. I think that's come from, Jim, you can talk about that. It's come from the judges themselves, right? I think someone said the earlier session that that's the lay of the land, whether we like it or not. How we present ourselves affects our credibility. And then interactions with families and attorneys, and especially when we're out in the hall and it's a busy place, there's a lot going on. I think, like Lynn said, some of the attorneys are just meeting with their clients right there and discussing confidential things. And certainly if, you know, a lot of the judges really appreciate when families who are working on their action plans have a good relationship with their social worker. They can sit with them and go in with them, and that's evident, but that's not always the case. There's a lot of animosity going on usually or often between how the parents see their progress and how they feel they're being treated by DCF. But Jim, do you want to talk about the hallway traffic or happenings? You know, and we'll be right there with you. And if we have to go in, we'll have you in a spot where we can find you. But there's a lot going on in the outside of it all.
Well, I mean, there may be times that we may leave you alone, but for the most part, we're going to be with you the whole time.
Yep.
So usually we find a comfortable place either to sit or stand and wait. If you were, for example, with me and I was the only person there and I had more than one case, then I would park you down by whatever the courtroom was, where the hearing was going to be. But for the most part, one of us will be with you for your whole experience. Just we don't leave you to the wolves.
Yeah, and we want to talk about the list. We generally, if we don't go in, we're connecting with attorneys in the hallway to. You're really good at that, and Jim has a directory of the people that serve the court in his head, and we're learning them, getting to know them.
Yeah, it's like anything else. The more you do something, the more people you know. The longer you're in an environment, the more you become familiar with the people in the environment. But you know, if we were to go together on one of my cases, then I would introduce you to the attorneys. You would know who the attorneys are on the case. And some of them, for example, the child's attorney you may have communicated with through email or telephone call, and then you could put a name to a face. So that's beneficial. And the more relationships you build, the easier the flow of information becomes. But I think Emily touched on it a little bit. There's an intimidation factor, and I'm not saying that it never goes away, but goes away. So once you do it,
Yeah,
you don't ever take it lightly, because the court's a very serious place.
Mhm.
It's really the only place in our world where the truth absolutely matters and there's no two ways about it. And if you don't speak the truth, you're never believed again. And so that's one of the few places in our world where that's still true. But court is definitely that. So there's a weight to court, but you go in armed with what you know is the facts and the truth.
And a lot
And
of the
Jim-
attorneys, oh, go ahead.
No, well, all I was going to say, two things, right? One, real quick, just before I forget, and I think we forgot to mention it this afternoon, that sometimes, more so in outline courts than in Worcester, but sometimes other supervisors are covering other supervisors' cases. Your supervisor will always let you know if there's another supervisor covering your case and who to look for. And the second thing I wanted to mention came as a result of something that Jim said that sort of reminded me that when you meet attorneys or when you're talking with attorneys, sometimes they behave in a manner that might suggest that we work for them. And we don't. And so we don't take our direction from attorneys, and they rarely will do that if you're standing there with your supervisor. But sometimes if they happen to get you alone, they'll tell you, well, I think you should talk to this person, or I think you should do this, or, this is what really happened. And you always just need to make sure that you double back and check with your supervisor as to whether or not that is or isn't something that you should or should not be doing. Sometimes it's a wild goose chase, and sometimes, which is their job, they're just trying to make their client or portray their client in the best possible light. Attorneys don't, I guess I'm going to say this generally, but I would say as a rule, attorneys don't know their clients very well. And so I think that they often believe things that may or may not be true. And a lot of times, because they're talking with them 3 or 4 minutes before they go into a hearing, there isn't a lot of time to examine whether or not what they're telling their attorney is the truth. Right. So as a judge is asking each attorney about a status update, dad's attorney may say, oh, dad's doing wonderfully, he's, drug testing or what, whatever else is on his action plan. And, you're sitting there knowing that that's not actually true. And so sometimes the DCF attorney will challenge that information if the DCF attorney is aware of that, but sometimes it falls to us to say in a nice way, right? But in a factual way that that's not the information that we have, Judge. I spoke to his rehab counselor last week and they haven't received a drug test from him in 4 months, whatever that may be. And sometimes that's hard to stand up and say that, but we're not trying to do it in an adversarial way. We're just trying to say, you put this piece of information out there that actually is not true. And if we don't do that, then a judge will believe that dad is doing everything that he's supposed to be doing. So why aren't we reunifying, right?
Right. And it hasn't happened a lot, but a couple times I hear the attorney, giving an update, and it sounds like they're reading it right from our report.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, wait a minute.
It does
That
happen a lot.
sounds like what we wrote. And it's like, no wonder why they were so appreciative of receiving it ahead of time. They're like, thank you so much for your report. Yeah, okay, because you read it out loud. But I mean, if they're reading it and the judge is reading it, I mean, jigs up, but
I have
they do
actually
have
heard-
this. I've met so many great attorneys, and they
I was
have
gonna say,
enormous
didn't the judge call
caseloads.
an attorney out one time saying like, yes, I read the CASA report. Thank
Yes.
you very much.
Yes, yes, I did also see that in the CASA report, right? Some judges really will, just to.
That sounds like Murata. He's got a sense of humor. But some of them have been great, and they have big caseloads. There's last I knew there was a wait list for attorneys. People waiting for an attorney. So there's a lot of good ones, and they obviously have a vested interest different than ours. But I think we've met a lot of good ones that are trying. And let's see, I'm gonna move on a little bit here.
And Glow, I'm just saying, going off of like how sometimes the attorneys will read right off our report or anything like that. My famous line, I think I took it from Gloria Ann, was, if they do, go through attorneys, every attorney that goes and speaks, they usually ask CASA last, like, CASA, do you have anything else to say? And if you hear what they say and it's everything that you written in your report, my thing is, no, Your Honor, not anything that's already been said. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
I always say nothing beyond
Nothing
what's
to
already
add
been-
that's
yeah.
already been said, because they're basically saying what we say if they're reading our report.
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, thank you for that. Our role in court, so I think we also talked about that, but going over or speaking, during a hearing, if the judge asks CASA, the first most important thing is to stand, and you'll learn that it's not a big deal if it's because it's nerves, yep.
And
And
the court officer will yell at you if you don't, so no.
Oh.
worries.
Oh, then I'm going to bring this up because I had to apologize to Emily. So in Fitchburg, the acoustics of that room, we were reminded at the beginning, going back in person, Jose made it, the court officer who's very helpful, he's been there for years, made it very clear in his speech that the acoustics in that room allow the judge to hear every conversation all the way back. I don't know, I guess you could call them pews, but they're been, the seats. They look like pews from a church. She can hear the whispering and everything, just the way it bounces off. And so there is no talking in that room. And then talking in general, and I've witnessed attorneys asked to step out, like the court officer said, you need to leave because they're conferencing during a hearing, which is, it is rude. I mean, people are trying to get their fair shake, and everybody's trying to get their fair shake. Kids are getting their representation. Talking can muddle that or interfere with it. So we usually just write down, we have a notepad, and if we want to write anything down between the two of us, or while we're sitting, if you were with me as an advocate, we just make little notes. So that's something else to think about. So speaking in court, concise. I practice ahead of time, go over it beforehand with your supervisor. The points that we want to make about the case. And again, if attorneys are on point and they bring it all up, then we don't have to do that. And if you feel more comfortable, your supervisor will do it. I felt Emily was ready, sorry. And Jim, you may want to add to that. No, okay. And the last thing, which is a fun thing to talk about, that went away during COVID, but is coming back, as a swearing-in ceremony. So the volunteers who were trained during COVID, up until now, we're going to talk about a swearing-in ceremony, virtually or in person. I think Lynn's going to talk about that because she's been able to talk to Judge Keating about that. So we're excited. The swearing-in ceremonies are really special. And Suzanne she goes further back than I do. But when I joined in 2017 as an advocate, that ceremony was just, it meant the world to me. It just brought in the importance of our work and the process, and just I got excited about being a part of the process, and it felt good, and the CASA had a little reception, and it was just, the judge comes in and just, makes it special for all of us and recognizes our organization as a whole too.
So usually what we do, and we did talk to Judge Keating about this, and we used to have it in the jury pool room just because I don't even know why we decided to have it in there. But when we met with Judge Keating last week, we decided to change it, and we'll now have it in a courtroom, which I think makes more sense, so that people get to see what the inside of a courtroom looks like before they have to go. And so we have a training that's coming up in July, and we will likely do a live or an in-person swearing-in ceremony sometime in July or the early part of August. You'll all, people that have not been able to participate previously, you'll all get notification of that. It is usually around 3:30 in the afternoon. We have to kind of get in and out before 4:30, which is when the court closes. One of the judges will do it in the last few years, it's typically been Judge Murata. He'll come in, say a few words and swear you in, and then he usually hands out the certificates that you've all received. And for people that can't make the in-person hearing, we will likely have a virtual hearing, shortly before or shortly after, just so we can get everybody sworn in that was not sworn in during COVID. It's held at the Worcester courthouse. You will need to come in through security and all that kind of thing, but you can bring your cell phones as long as you have your badges with you. You could take pictures. The judge is great about taking pictures with families. You can bring your families with you. The whole ceremony itself probably lasts 20 to 30 minutes, and then we kind of head on out. But it is a really nice ceremony, and it's a great way to start off on a case. And I think you'll find that judges are really appreciative and really thankful for the time you spend volunteering on these cases.
Thank you. Yep, something to look forward to. I just wanted to open up to some questions. Anybody have some questions? We'd love to cover some things that you're thinking about or concerned about or wondering about. Emma, go for it. Thank you.
Maybe it's been mentioned, but I just was wondering what happens in a trial.
Ah, good, excellent question. Jim, you're up. Please and thank you.
Well, the thing about a trial is that generally the trial is to terminate parental rights. So normally CASA is not called to testify. If you were called to testify, we would prep you. Chances are that the DCF attorney would also prep you. Although it's pretty simple, don't answer any questions you're not asked. Don't answer more than the question. Don't lie. And you're allowed to bring your reports. And if you don't know, if you don't recall, you're allowed to ask the judge, can I please refer to my notes? If somebody objects to the question that you're asked, you wait. And you wait for the judge to either tell you to go ahead and answer the question, or the judge tells the attorney to rephrase the question. If really that the rights are terminated and there's no pre-adoptive home, so they're legal orphans, generally speaking, CASA stays on the case because the children don't have a permanent placement. So we will stay on a case. Suzanne has a case like that right now. I have a personal case like that right now.
She is too.
Right. But we got that on that other case post-trial.
Oh, wow.
The second case. So that was post-trial. If the judge decides that DCF didn't prove its case and allows either the parents to temporarily get custody back or leaves the children where they are, then they're going to definitely want CASA to remain involved. But if we're not called to trial, we're not called to testify, we don't attend the trials.
Our reports are evidence though, right? All of our reports are submitted as evidence, so that we're there in that sense.
Right. So when you hear your cases going to the trial session, the next hearing in the trial session picks the dates. So they're set the final pretrial date, which is usually months out. And that's generally the date of our last report. But as far as an advocate, you do what you've done all along. You still visit the child every month. And if there's a report to be generated, we generate it and send it in. Once the trial goes, depending on what happens, you won't file any more reports. If the adoption is approved or there's an adoptive family, then our involvement ends.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Emily.
So, piggybacking to that question, what happens if it's not an adoption, it's a guardianship?
Same.
Right, so the kids are placed in, same thing, okay. So,
Yeah.
Excellent.
Same.
You can always, I shouldn't say always, right? We would check with the pre-adopt or the adoptive parents or the guardians, and you more than likely you would have the opportunity to make one last visit to say, goodbye to the child. From that standpoint, I mean, sometimes it depends upon the case. Sometimes you'll feel much stronger. That doesn't sound like very good grammar there, but
We know what you meant.
you'll feel more strongly about making that last visit, and in other cases, maybe not so much. But once, as Jim said, once the final pretrial has happened, we'll certainly continue to visit. We're only allowed to file a report after that time if there's some sort of emergency type of situation that we need to bring to the judge's attention. But other than that, you would continue your visits until a decision is made in the trial. And at that time, you would discuss with your supervisor, whether or not to make a last visit, or to, let not foster parents, right? Adoptive parents know that you won't be visiting anymore, and, so forth and so on.
Gail, how are you?
A quick question. I think you answered this, Gloria, and it's a little tangential from court, but if somebody's placed in a pre-adoptive home, we are still involved until the adoption is final. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, until the
trial.
Until the trial.
Not
This-
until the adoption's final, right?
I'm
Because
sorry.
sometimes the adoption's not final for another 6 months.
Mhm.
Okay, and then
Sorry about that, to the trial.
That's all right.
and if the pre-adoption home is out of state, as the family I'm working with might happen, we can still go out of state to see that child.
Up until the trial, right? Is that what you mean? I mean,
I guess what I'm
Yes.
asking is,
The answer is yes.
Yes.
okay,
The answer is yes. And we've had people go to Connecticut or New Hampshire.
That's where
or-
she's, in
yeah,
Connecticut.
this is Connecticut.
Yeah,
I mean,
New
what-
England.
One of my first cases, they went into a kinship. They gets whisked away, and it was in North Dakota. So I guess I was done, right? And I didn't even get to say goodbye to them, but it was a good thing for them. So
But is it Massachusetts if the child now if it's a pre-adoptive placement in another state, which DCF agency, or do they work together?
so they do what's called, Massachusetts DCF will initiate what's called an ICPC,
Yep.
Interstate Compact. I forget the other two initials. And so the local DCF will go out, do a home study to ensure, that the home is adequate. They'll report back to DCF in Massachusetts, but I believe that that's the only role that the out-of-state agency has.
Okay.
They don't then oversee that home. To the best of my knowledge, they don't do that because they don't, like, that person hasn't done anything, right? I mean, it's a placement. I think the only way that another DC or DCF in another state gets involved is if there's a concern about the out-of-state placement.
Thank you.
speaking of adoption, Robin, would you be willing to talk about the fun ceremony, the pleasant things that you got to? Have you done that before? Did you participate in it? No, it was the first time.
This was my first time. My first case I ever had. I was on it for about 2.5 years. And I ended in January because she was in a pre-adoptive home and the father relinquished his rights. So it was nice. The family invited me
To the
to the
ceremony.
adoption ceremony, and I was a little nervous. But I went in and I watched the process, and it was really nice, because they
Yes.
changed the child's middle name and last name as well to the adoptive families, and it was nice. They had family there from out of state. They had the grandparents from the mother's side and the mother's best friend, and
I
the
saw a
little
big
girl-
troop. big troop.
Yeah, the little girl's grandparents from the mother's side was there, so
Oh, wow. That's
and
lovely.
it was really nice. And Theodorette was there.
Yep.
She was there on another case, but she came in and we took all kinds of pictures, and it was nice to see that process that, just because you work on a case, I was able to see like the happy ending.
Really,
know?
it's so true. Yeah. And who was the judge, Lowry?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and what happened inside? I've done it, I wouldn't, Judge Erskine did one that I was able to go to, which was super fun.
Well-
Just, if you want to describe to people what happens inside the courtroom.
Yep. We went in and we all sat down. Of course, you have to stand up when the judge comes in. But then the lady, I don't know,
The
That's
clerk,
right.
she read off the list, like what was going to happen that day and everything else. And then the judge sat down and they said that the child's name, and then henceforth the child's now going to be called blah blah blah, and and she signed the paperwork and she gave the gavel to the little girl and said, now you have to hit it 3 times. And then
oh,
they let because she has now a sister, and there's they have a foster child as well. They adopted the first child, and now they just adopted the second one. So they let them, if they want to, each bang the gavel and gave them the paperwork and gave her a little goodie bag. And then they came out with another bag because there were other kids there, her friends' kids and stuff like that. And they gave them all a little stuffed animal that they could pick out the one they wanted. And then we all took pictures up with the judge and, with the CASA worker and the supervisor and,
super.
family and everything. It was really nice.
This courtroom takeover, right?
It was. It didn't last long. I thought we were going to be there all day, but we get in
Yeah.
there, and by a little after 9, and by like 9:30, we were done.
Yeah, because the kids can't. I mean, if they're little, it's like they're gonna stop. So yeah, that's
But
great. Thanks for
it was
sharing.
nice to see that I get to follow the case all the way through. I was glad that they allowed me to be there.
Well, we're grateful to you for doing that and being a part of that and all the work you did on the case over the 2 years too. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a special time. Any other questions that something we need to touch on a little in more length or?
I just had a question
Hi,
about
Terry.
Hi.
Sure.
the case that I went to. It took a long time to get to it, and then by the time we did, we found out that the father had asked to get a new attorney. So basically, as you said, nothing happened. But I was interested that the father attended the case by video. Is that something that CASA can do at times too? Like if I wasn't feeling up for the drive, can you attend by video, or you always have to be there in person?
I mean, at this time, there may have been certain circumstances where he had to participate via Zoom, and sometimes if they're incarcerated, they have to do. That's one of the reasons. If a parent is incarcerated, they will attend via Zoom. Maybe, I mean, Lynn, you can talk more about that. Yeah, it's mostly in person.
I don't think at this time that they're allowing hybrid, we'd consider that hybrid, right? Where some people are there via Zoom and others not. Every now and then, as Gloria said, there's a special circumstance. I mean, we could certainly always ask, for something like that, but they just really felt, the court, in talking with Judge Keating a couple weeks ago, that just a lot of things were falling through the cracks, that cases weren't moving as quickly as they could with Zoom, and felt very strongly about in-person hearings across the board.
Thank you for your question, though, Terry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that day. I mean, that's so those situations are so often unforeseen, right, Jim? Just, yeah. And everybody shows up, and if one attorney is held up, they can't move forward. That person needs to be represented. So those they're often out of our control, but we'll do our best to get you in and out of there as soon as we find out.
Truth, I anticipated it to go that way. I wasn't expected that I'd be there in and out.
Yeah.
No,
Oh, good. Yeah.
so I
Um,
was, but I was surprised that the father showed up by video, and then I was like, I could have just.
And sometimes if they're in treatment, if they're in a residential treatment too, there's different circumstances that allow them to not be present. But for the most part, they need to be present more than any of us. So, thank you. You have any other questions you can think of? If you think of them at a later time, you can email any of us. We're ready to answer, and things will come up as your cases evolve. And we learn more about what's happening in the court for each case. They can be unique. And we're happy to answer those questions. And it's not, it's an optional thing. It's not required for you to go to court. We respect your busy lives and your day-to-day things. And so if that's something that doesn't fit, that's okay. It's okay. We understand, and we'll keep you filled in. But we wanted to offer a training for those who are interested and might want to attend at least once and know, how they're making the needle push in the way that the kids need it to go. So thank you all. It's so good to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
We are recording this, so if you want to look back at any point, it'll be out on the our YouTube channel, I believe. And again, as things come up, feel free to ask any time. So thank you all. Good to see you.
Have a great one.
Thank you. Have a good night.
We appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bruce.